This movie is better than it has any right to be. The last Showa Era Godzilla film, Terror of Mechagodzilla, is a movie that fits the definition of a black sheep. Instead of being colorful and eccentric like the other 70s era Godzilla films, this movie is dim, it's brooding, it's even grimy. This goes down to the characters of the film, which stand out far above those of a standard Godzilla flick. When people complain that a Godzilla film never has good human characters, I'm left balking at the notion. Some of the classic cases are Shindo from Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, or the ultimate example, Serizawa from the original 1954 classic. But you can't make a list of human characters within Godzilla without mentioning Dr. Shinzo Mafune. Here's a character driven by his bitterness into making decisions that ultimately lead to his downfall, and the downfall of the remainder of his family. It helps that Terror of Mechagodzilla had several key ingredients going for it that no other 70s era Godzilla film had. First, the film was always intentioned to be a dark tragedy befitting the bitterness felt within mid-70s Japan. Second, it was written by Ishiro Honda and a newcomer, Yukio Takayama. Takayama brought to the table a character-driven, poetic story which happened to feature giant monsters in it, and Ishiro Honda took her ideas and penned them out into a more manageable, but no less poetic, filmable script. Third, and certainly not least, is the fact that Dr. Mafune is played by Akihiko Hirata, the man most responsible for bringing such humanity to Dr. Serizawa. Thus, Terror of Mechagodzilla is a sharp departure for much of the Godzilla franchise. It certainly has tropes common, not just within the franchise, but just the 70s in general, but nevertheless, Terror of Mechagodzilla does not focus on ordinary people trying to do good things. While we do have a trio of main characters, as most Ishiro Honda films do, only one of them is unquestionably the good guy, and that's Ichinose. The other two are arguably antagonists, Dr. Mafune and his cyborg daughter Katsura. Katsura being the middle ground between the two men. Dr. Mafune has an aura of tragedy which permeates his presence throughout the movie. Here is a brilliant man who was laughed out of his profession for discovering a dinosaur living under the sea. He is then slowly driven mad by his obsession with undersea life and its ability to try to control it. It's almost as if Mafune had no control over his own life, thus he would control others to compensate. And that lack of control permeates the remainder of Mafune's life. His obsession with his work inadvertently leads to his wife's death, leaving Mafune the sole parent of Katsura, his only daughter. And as he raises her, she too grows a curiosity for what her father is doing, and I believe firmly that Dr. Mafune always loved his daughter to the very end. So when one of his experiments go wrong, and the shock electrocutes Katsura to death, what do you think this man must have been thinking? No wife, no child, no career. What's left? Luckily for Mafune, the aliens from the third planet from the black hole rescue Katsura. Through their technology and advanced scientific achievements, they resurrect Katsura from the dead. But is it really Katsura? This is a highly detailed cyborg, not Mafune's actual daughter. But his gratefulness far outshines these doubts. After all, he has his figurative daughter back, and she almost acts like her old self. But there's undoubtedly a coldness to Katsura now that we do not see within the limited flashbacks. Instead of eagerness like we see in said flashbacks, we see cold reservedness, as if the aliens had consumed a small part of her humanity. But Mafune seems oblivious to such a change. After all, here is a group of people that not only understand Mafune, but actively challenge and engage with him. The first shot we see of Dr. Mafune in the present is him sharing a glass of wine with Tsuda, who at this point Mafune has no idea is actually an alien. Only after Katsura meets Ichinose does that piece of humanity once missing start creeping back into her programming, which the aliens do not like and causes problems further on. As for Mafune, when the aliens reveal themselves and Mechagodzilla, it makes perfect sense why he would so blindly throw himself into their lap. They saved his daughter. They listened to him, they challenged him, and also housed the same scientific intellect Mafune was so deprived. Thus, the aliens promising him a home in the ashes of a devastated Tokyo probably sounded like paradise to Dr. Mafune. After all, who else in the world did Mafune care for other than Katsura? No one. Mafune throws himself into the reconstruction of Mechagodzilla, which reveals some of the arrogance I mentioned earlier. When the aliens question him about Titanosaurus, Mafune is quick to have Katsura release the monster on Tokyo, even if for a brief moment. This fails and backfires in Mafune's face, and the only reason the aliens do not kill Mafune is because he is still useful to them. And this begins to showcase a rift between Mafune and Mughal and Suda. And earlier, without much thought, Mafune offhandedly mentions using living brainwaves to best complete Mechagodzilla and make it the perfect machine. Both these events push Mafune deeper into the alien's pockets and start a brief transformation within him. Mafune knows he's lost, and in the process, Katsura was shot and killed. The aliens agree to save her once more, but place the controls of Mechagodzilla inside her body, again turning Katsura more into a tool of destruction than a kind-hearted daughter. And Mafune sees this. He even weeps over her body as she slowly opens her cold eyes. However, this is where Mafune has a choice. Mechagodzilla has yet to be unleashed, and Titanosaurus remains under his relative control. He's reached a fork in the road. Could he redeem himself by taking Katsura and perhaps turning his own weapons on the aliens, thus saving Tokyo and thousands of lives? Or will he double down and remain shackled to the aliens? Because at this point, there's not really a camaraderie between them anymore. He knows he's a tool, like his daughter, for the aliens' use. But Mafune chooses to double down. And it makes sense. A relapse in judgment, or perhaps a feeling of being too deep into something. On a brief side note, there are slight hints of religious undertones throughout this movie. Katsura is resurrected from the dead by aliens whose intellect far outmatch any human being. And even Mughal says another one of my favorite lines in the film.
貴様は一体何だ? 救世主だ。人間どもが汚した大地球を新しく作り直す救世主だ。
That same scene, where everything comes to a head, Ichinose, now captive to the aliens, is shocked to see Mafune alive.
あなたはマフネだ。マフネ博士。
Ichinose is a staunch defender of Katsura and Mafune up to this point, and he says, "Don't, I'm proud of you."
博士、まさかあなたは、少なくとも僕はあなたを信じています。誇りに思っています。
Had Mafune only heard those words from fellow scientists or colleagues earlier in his life, if only some, not just one, had shown such belief and understanding in what Mafune found and sought to create, would Mafune have chosen the path he ultimately did? But despite those words from Ichinose, it's too late for Dr. Mafune, and he says as such.
何もかも遅すぎたのだ。
Finally, when one human understands Mafune and believes in his research, he is too far in bed with the aliens to change his mind. And once Godzilla, with the help of other humans, begins to defeat the aliens again, they turn on Mafune. Interpol agents are storming Mafune's house. Mughal, the supposed ally to Mafune, calls for him in the pretense of escaping. But instead, Mughal grabs Mafune as a shield, and the man is riddled with bullets. The last thing Mafune shouts before he dies is his daughter's name, the last speck of humanity he had left that was not swallowed by the bitterness he's felt for humanity all of those years. Now, if that isn't a tragic character, I really don't know what is. A man whose entire life work was mocked, and he was then cast aside to live a life of basic poverty, where he obsesses over what little he can create, thus losing his wife and daughter in the process. Ignoring the blatant plot hole that is Mafune's colleagues not believing in him discovering a dinosaur living under the sea in a universe where Godzilla exists, Mafune is not just one of the best characters in the Godzilla franchise, but he is he's just so unbelievably relatable. He's a man swallowed up in his work so much, he too loses touch with his humanity, only to realize it too late. The only issue I have with Terra Mechagodzilla is that it's too short. It barely runs 1 hour and 23 minutes, and with characters like Mafune, Katsura, and even Ichinose to an extent, the movie could have easily benefited from an additional 10 to 15 minutes to help flesh them out even more. Instead, what we have seems more like a Cliff Notes version of what could have otherwise been a total masterpiece in every way, shape, and form. But what we got while still great, could have easily been better. And Dr. Mafune is an example of the greatness that this movie has that probably could have been even better had the movie fleshed things out a little bit more. That all being said, the lack of runtime in no way diminishes what I've discussed thus far. It's all there, played out in the movie that, despite its runtime and extremely limited resources, pushes Terror of Mechagodzilla into one of the best the franchise has to offer, and one of the best kaiju movies ever made. It's a movie that is way better, considering the era and the rushed production, than it has any right to be. And it ultimately comes down to the characters and the tragic aura which permeates the movie. Katsura discovering her humanity, Ichinose's awakening to the realities of his heroes, and of course, Dr. Mafune being consumed by his bitterness towards his own kind. Thank you very much for watching. All of my social media is in the description below. Stay tuned for more Godzilla videos, everybody. In the end, this is Adam Noyce of AN Productions saying, sayonara.